Yeah, I haven't done this much research for a Red Power Hour episode in a minute.
Well, the amount of the amount of news out there right now. I hadn't really looked at the news in a number of days, and then I woke up yesterday morning early and I just started scanning the news, and I was like, damn, there's a lot of shit going on out there in the big bad world. And none of it's good.
And none of it's good.
Except for William and Kate getting chased off of Belize.
Okay, so I didn't read about that, but when you brought that up, I was like, that's the best news of the week. That and Madeleine Albright, that imperialist warmonger, expiring.
Yep.
Welcome back, everyone, to Red Power Hour. Elena and I took 9 pages of notes because we're going to try to be more serious today. We're going to put on our serious faces and talk about news. Good times. Like, I'm sure everyone is super excited to talk about all the terrible things happening in the world, but we just thought it was time. We've been spending a lot of our episodes on like different topics like love and popular culture and stuff like that, which we do, I think, pretty well here at RPH, but it was time to kind of tackle some bigger stories. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, of course, Elena is here, and it's going to be me and Elena in conversation about all the things. Glad You're Dead obituaries, racism in South Dakota. You can always depend on South Dakota to make you a good anti-Indian white supremacy story.
Yep.
Oh, again, still perfectly acceptable in the United States of America to just be openly racist and to segregate Native people. So going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to kind of go in depth about Leonard Peltier's push for clemency, what I think many are understanding is possibly his final push to be released out of prison, and going to do some fact-based conversation about that. I think there's a lot of like misinformation and misunderstanding about Peltier's case, particularly its relationship with the Anime Aquash murder investigation that, of course, has been ongoing for several decades. And I just wanted to clarify some of that and kind of give, I don't know, like an indigenous feminist, a left indigenous feminist perspective on why we actually should be supporting Peltier's clemency and his release from prison in the final years of his time here on Mother Earth. But before we get into that, I just wanted to remind everyone to support our Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/redmediapr, or just look up Red Media at patreon.com and you should be able to find us. As I say every time we record, Red Media is a press and media project run entirely for and by Indigenous people. We produce writing and work according to our own intellectual traditions and not those imposed upon us by settler culture. And we believe in Indigenous abundance and support Indigenous writers and storytellers by providing them a platform they may not otherwise have. And so all of our podcasts, sorry, there's one podcast. I don't know why I keep saying this. We have one podcast, it's the Red Nation Podcast. And then we all like record episodes as part of the Red Nation Podcast main feed. But we're trying to get all of our podcasts. We used to have more podcasts and then things were just fluctuating a lot last year. But we're trying to add another podcast, to the Red Media Podcast family, Native Reads. Of course, I've been saying for, 2 years now that we need to reach the 2,000 patron mark to be able to launch that, to have the funding to launch that. And Native Reads is, Indigenous writers interviewing other Indigenous writers, kind of in the tradition and the spirit of what Red Media stands for. We're currently at 1,838 patrons, which is up 38 from 2 weeks ago, which is actually wonderful. I really appreciate all of you who've joined. Yeah, that's a great jump. I know everyone is struggling financially. And so we just really appreciate anything that you can give on a monthly basis to the project of Red Media. And so my goal, I think we might actually maybe by the summer be able to reach that 2,000 patron mark so that we can launch that next podcast. And of course, your Patreon funds go towards more than just producing podcasts and media work. We do a lot of mutual aid out in reservation communities in Pine Ridge and the Navajo Nation. Of course, we do our No Dead Natives campaign in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and other reservation border towns, just trying to support our relatives who are living on the streets, just struggling under capitalism and colonialism. So your Patreon donations also go towards that important work. If you want to learn more about the Red Nation, you can go to therednation.org. It's our website. You can also visit all of our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Those are usually a bit more updated than our website. Website's a little analog these days. So yeah, social media is the place to go. And again, just to remind you, if you want to donate or become a patron for Red Media, just go to patreon.com, look up Red Media, or just go to patreon.com/redmediapr. So I also wanted to pitch, right, to just remind folks that Elena and I are going to start to do a lot more bonus content for our patrons. So if you become a patron, like you can even just join at $1, right? $1 a month. You can get access to all of our bonus content. And Elena and I have decided that it is incredibly important in 2022 to do a multi-bonus episode roast of Kevin Costner.
Because he's been at it
again
for many years, and he's still at it with the new series, Yellowstone in 1883.
Yep.
More Dances with Wolves, more bad natives.
It's like, we've been talking about here how like reservation dogs and other things that like native people are more visible than ever. Yet Kevin Costner is literally still just peddling the same story 35 years later after Dances with Wolves came out. And native actors are like venerated native actors like Graham Greene are still being expected to play these like pathetic, just stereotyped characters of native people, like through the lens of Kevin Costner. Like, who cares what Kevin Costner thinks or has to say about native people or like the history of settlement on the Western frontier? Like, go away. Just give that money to native creatives and native content producers. So we're just going to do a multi-episode kind of bonus content feed where we're just going to keep telling Kevin Costner to go away. So you know what, Kevin? You should like join our Patreon so you can listen to that. And then once like you hear what we have to say, then you should give all that money. And you should give that goddamn land back. Lakota people that you own, or that, doesn't he own like a buffalo farm or something like that in the Black Hills?
Yeah, I believe he bought land in the Black Hills, but he also, I recall, owned a casino in Deadwood. And if you know anything about the casinos and or Deadwood, it's just an awful place on Lakota land that does nothing, gives nothing back to the Lakota people. And it's just, Deadwood is just, I don't know. I mean, horrific. It's a horrific place.
Well, Kevin Costner, we're coming for you. That's what's happening in our bonus feed
We are
for the
coming
next
for you.
several episodes. I'm begrudgingly committing to watching these shows, 1883 and Yellowstone. It's like 4 seasons. They're like hour-long episodes. I don't, I'm just going to, it's going to be wild. It's going to be a wild ride, but.
It is. It's, I usually watch these things just to see how they portray
Totally
native people, but then you get sucked in, and not necessarily because they're good, but because some of the characters are just, you just want to watch and see what happens next. And some of the characters are just like, wow, white people going totally insane on network TV, and like, wow. I mean, it's like a soap opera. Yeah, anyway. I'm not going to say anymore because we're definitely going to roast on it, but wow, bad TV.
good times. And the reason why we're going to roast on it is because, like Yellowstone, I have heard so many people talk about that show. It's a very popular show. So the fact that
it's so popular that they did 1883, but they're also
right?
doing another one.
So they did the 1883 is the prequel to Yellowstone, right? And then there's like
and then they're going to do the one in between 1883 and current time, which Yellowstone is current. So they're going to do one between 1883 and the early. I'm thinking it's the early 1900s. But it's interesting how all of this Manifest Destiny post-Civil War, I mean, that's what Dances with Wolves was, but how all of a sudden this is becoming so popular. Like this idea of conquering the West, which we all know what happened with Manifest Destiny, but this idea of regeneration through violence. which is a common theme in American history. So why is it that right now we're seeing an uptick in this need to reinforce westward expansion and reinforce that level of colonialism?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Elena. Because, right? Maybe we can just hop into our first story. The first story we're going to cover, which is this like spectacular demonstration of anti-Indian racism in Rapid City. I think news came out in the Rapid City Journal. Was it this week or last week? Sorry, I'm pulling it up right now. These white hotel owners. Okay, so the news broke on the 21st. So it was just Monday, Tuesday, whatever. It was this week.
Yeah.
So news broke in the Rapid City Journal of a white family that owns a hotel, the Grand Gateway Hotel, which is right off of the interstate in North Rapid. If people are familiar with the geography of Rapid City, it's right by like the Walmart that all of the native people shop at. And so they were complaining, right, being a hotel in like the native part of Rapid City, because Rapid City's segregated because it's like an intensely racist space. It's an intensely racist border town. And so native people are mostly sequestered to the northern part of the city. And so this hotel is there, and this white woman, this owner, Connie it's the whitest name ever, some Nordic ass name. She wrote a Facebook comment last Sunday, so just 6 days ago, that she can, quote, not allow a Native American to enter our business, including Cheers, which I guess is like a sports bar or something attached to the hotel, stating she can't tell, quote, who is a bad native or who is a good native. Oh my God, it just kills me. But this created a huge like firestorm, both in Rapid City and then on social media. Her son went on some sort of rant on social media, I guess, accusing the mayor, who my understanding is a Democrat, of Rapid City, of like engaging in some sort of like left-wing conspiracy to slander that family. And it's like no one forced your mom to write racist shit on Facebook. And also everybody knows that like the white petty bourgeoisie in a place like Rapid City hates Indians. Everyone knows those hotel owners and those small business owners were like all the people like 2 years ago, you know, flooding state capitals to protest like, you know, the shutdown when COVID hit, you know, because they all wanted haircuts and they don't want their like money and their cash flow interrupted. And like maybe you shouldn't own a hotel on stolen, an actual treaty land. That land literally belongs to Lakota and Dakota people. So kiss my ass, first of all. Like you're literally just squatting on land that isn't actually yours. And then you're running a business in the native part of town, and most of your patrons are probably native people. So you make your entire living off of exploitation, the exploitation and the extraction of value and wealth from native people. And then just like all good old reservation border towns, you know, you have the audacity to be like, oh, we only want good Indians here.
But you can't tell the difference between the good ones and the bad ones. So I think we should just assume that they're all bad. And then, you know, not allow anybody in. And we'll see how fast that business tanks.
Well, the son, I guess he's a co-owner, Nick Connie's son. I guess he sent an email. So this was reported again in the Rapid City Journal on March 24th. So things unfolded quickly. It was just 3 days. So that was, 2 days ago? I guess he sent a lengthy email to Christy Nome, who's like the shithole governor, a Republican governor of South Dakota, asking her to remove the mayor of Rapid City, this left-wing conspiracy theorist, mayor of Rapid City. And she, if people remember, South Dakota this was 2020, right? July 4th of 2020. Yeah. There were several people protesting. Trump came to speak in the Black Hills. Very strategic choice. We actually talked about it on Red Power Hour. Just the imagery and this symbolism of him coming into the heart of what is really contested territory, to give his 4th of July speech. I think Kristi Noem at that time was like, I think she was kind of hoping that she would have, I think she still hopes that she'll have these like, she has these political aspirations to go to Washington, D.C. to be part of like the Republican establishment or whatever. She's dumb as hell. She's racist as hell. And she's just like, she just loved Trump. She just like would do anything for Trump when he was in office. If people don't remember, that's who Kristi Noem is. And so this guy, Connie's son, Nick, he wrote to her and her comms team responded, "The governor is opposed to all racial discrimination. There is no room for racial discrimination in South Dakota." And it says her office normally does not respond to media requests about these types of emails, but that she condemned the racist remarks. I just love it because if people remember what happened after that July 4th protest, when, just a bunch of Native people, Indian Collective, which is kind of a newer, it's probably the largest Native nonprofit in the United States. It's based out of Rapid City. But Nick Tilson, who kind of runs and founded Indian Collective, he was arrested, if you remember, at that protest and was facing like felony charges and just like massive recrimination from the state of South Dakota. It was eventually dropped, but I know enough to know that there's such a long history of criminalizing and vilifying not just everyday Native people, but also like activists and revolutionaries, because so many of them, frankly, have come out of Lakota and Dakota territory. Ochatishakoe people have always been incredibly important, I think, to the larger histories of indigenous liberation. And so South Dakota is just like a profoundly right-wing, counter-revolutionary, white supremacist space. So...
yeah, it's an awful area to be in. I mean, I've never encountered anything like South Dakota, and even over into Wyoming is not as bad, but it's bad. But the July 4th thing, rally that Trump had, and my favorite thing was to see the counter protesters there with their signs, "Go back to where you came from," and that's basically what they were trying to do. Because that was where they came from. And the Black Hills belongs to the Lakota people. The colonizers' court even upheld that. And yet, what do you do when your highest court in the land upholds a treaty as law of the land, but you don't get your land back? I mean, imagine like that's what is happening up there in the Black Hills, and yet these stupid hotel owners still seem to think they own the land. It's kind of mind blowing.
Got that settler hubris. So it's just very unique to white settlers in particular.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess something else that was also interesting is that this family, the Ur family, was pissed off at not just the mayor, but also like the Rapid City police, which are just like notoriously racist. So it's funny that right-wing like pro-militia hotel owners were pissed off at like other cops. Like it's like cop on cop violence. No, but they called out the Rapid City police station or police force, and just the city itself, because they had some sort of grant money, because after 2020, right after the George Floyd uprising of 2020, all of these towns and cities across the United States were trying to reform, like do some sort of police reform, like a very liberal kind of whitewashed approach. No one wants to talk about abolition anymore. Like somehow that's a word that just fell into the ether, and like that's apparently not an option anymore, even though many of us are still gunning for that. But nevertheless, so I guess Rapid City did this. They got a multi-year grant, a large grant from the MacArthur Foundation, apparently, to do some police reform and to reduce the jail population and racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And so this family were just like blamed the rise of bad Indians, like bad Indians engaging in criminal activity on this like liberal agenda to reform racial disparities. and like prison populations, the criminal justice system.
So the police in Rapid City got a grant to reform the police force, and now they won't arrest Indians. Imagine that. Which we know is not true. But
oh my God, it kills me. So they got this grant in 2015. Sorry. So it was like way before the uprising of 2020. But I mean, if everyone remembers, like the first real, like incredibly powerful Black Lives Matter uprising happened in 2014. And so I think that there was like an initial shockwave around the country to get these kinds of grants or whatever. And anyone who knows Rapid City knows that like the people who are constantly harassed by the cops and killed by cops and killed by settler vigilantes, I'm sure this Ur family has probably gone out and fucking trolled and done some Indian rolling in Rapid City. They sound like that kind of people. But it's always Native people, and it's usually unsheltered Native people, you know, folks who are struggling with being in homes, you know, who have no choice but to be out in public or out on the streets, and so they're easier targets. And so it's just like it's fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating because it's like white on white violence, which is hilarious, or like settler on settler violence, where it's like the right wingers who like enjoy like the fruits of stolen land and then also just like really enjoy Indian killing, you know, are like pissed off at the liberals who are trying to pretend like the entire basis of, you know, their existence in a place like Rapid City isn't also premised on those two things. And so then they're just like bickering online. It's like, good times, guys. Good times, you guys. And then Kristi Noem saying that she doesn't believe in racial discrimination. What a circus. I don't even know.
Unless Trump's doing it, right?
I don't even know what else to say. I don't even know what else to say about it.
I will just say one thing, that I was up in South Dakota. I was actually outside of Rapid City, but I went into what I thought was like a coffee shop kind of bar thing, and there was a sign behind the bar. It said, "No prairie." And I literally stopped in my tracks. Probably took me a good 10 to 15 seconds for that to enter my brain. What's a prairie? Oh my God. And turned around and walked out. And that's the only place I've ever seen those signs, was in South Dakota.
When was that?
It was in the mid 80s. But yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's honestly, I can't tell you how many people, like Lakota and Dakota people, I know who have been called that.
Yeah, I had never heard it before, and not that I think it's you know, solely in the Dakotas, but I had just never heard it before, and it really, you know, smacked me in the face. It took me a few seconds before I realized what the sign was referring to. But South Dakota has always been a very scary place. At least the settler communities have.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's hard for people to understand. Like South Dakota is exceptional. It's like exceptionally white supremacist, I think, when it comes to Native people. For lots of different reasons, for the reasons we're talking about. There's just like a strong tradition of somewhat militant indigenous resistance that comes out of the Oceti-Sakowee community. You know, there's really like strong contestations over land and treaty lands in a place like Rapid City. And also, I think the pattern and the history of white settlement in that place means that it's just a breeding ground for just like the violence that is settler identity. Particularly white settler identity. So the kind of fascism that we saw emerge during Trump's administration, and then I think it really was like super obvious during the uprising of 2020 when people were literally clashing in the streets. Of course, we had, you know, our own taste of that in New Mexico, which I think is documented quite well in Red Power Hour back in 2020 and 2021 when we were going through it. But like, if you think about, if you were shocked and scared at what you saw during Trump's administration, and especially like people getting gunned down by the fash in 2020. That's literally what it's always been like in South Dakota. Welcome to Rapid City. Like, what you saw for the first time is what our native relatives, whose homelands those are, face every single day. And so this incident, this hotel owner, saying these things, I guess there was a picture that came out, I saw it in passing, that they had hired like private, just people, militia people, basically the same small business owners in a place like Gallup when there was a Black Lives Matter solidarity march in June of 2020, which was just a bunch of kind of like young Navajo kids and teenagers and women. There were about 100 people. I remember all of those business people in downtown Gallup who also make their money off of exploiting and extracting value from our relatives. They all boarded up their windows and they all armed themselves. They had like snipers on us as we were going through the streets. But all of the people who were acting this way in 2020 are these kinds of people, these kinds of hotel owners. And like somehow, maybe white America was just shocked that there are so many of these kinds of people. But in border towns, which we've talked about also in length, these kinds of people gravitate to and also come into existence. They're literally trained. They cut their teeth on white supremacy through anti-Indianism and these kinds of border towns. And that is what it's like to live as a Native person in these spaces. And that's just America. And so those people were just waiting. They were just waiting for someone like Trump, to give them legitimacy at a national level. And actually, one of the other stories we wanted to talk about was, I think, what is like a quite similar kind of trend in the Ukraine, actually, when it comes to Roma people, but also just the profound racism and white supremacy that pervades Ukrainian society, and like obviously far before the Russian invasion, and that not being willing to talk openly and honestly about that means that like you have to be willing to talk about like the system and the structure of white supremacy and racism that exists, not just in a place like Ukraine, but in Europe more broadly, or in the United States, to understand like why things are happening the way that they're happening today. And so I'm gonna, if it's okay, Elena, I'm gonna hand it over to you to kind of get us started on that conversation, because I do feel like there's just some parallels.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the Roma Romani, also referred to, although this is a pejorative term, as gypsies, are semi-nomadic folks who live throughout Eastern Europe, but all over. I mean, in the Iberian Peninsula, the Romani are all over. The particularly large numbers of Roma in the Ukraine, and this made semi-mainstream media recently because Roma people, there are photographs of Roma people taped to lampposts and painted green. And this was reported in the press, but also what was reported was that this is not so surprising, that white supremacists in the Ukraine have always attacked, to the point of massacre, Roma people. And this is particularly sort of, I think, poignant because we have been hearing a lot about the flowered scarves, like Melanie has on, and they've been attributed to Ukrainian babushkas and women in the Ukraine, but they're actually more specifically Roma designs. And the Roma are indigenous to Eastern Europe in particular, you see, but they've also migrated throughout the rest of Europe. And so when Native people took on that flowered scarf, that we call them the Sani scarves, it's actually sort of a kindred, indigenous to indigenous borrowing, if you will, because the Roma also have been persecuted for generations by whatever country they're in. And there are reports from Hungary, from Poland, from the Ukraine about the mistreatment of the Romani. And in World War II, they were treated the same way as Jews. They were, and I should have looked this up, but the Jews in World War II were designated by the Star of David that was sewn onto their clothing so they could be identified as being Jewish and persecuted accordingly. The same with gay and non-binary people. They were given pink triangles, which they had to wear on their clothing so they could be persecuted accordingly. And the Romani had the same symbol, had a symbol on their clothing, so they were equally as persecuted. And these are folks that are also in the line of fire in the Ukraine, but are treated as less than human, subhuman, by the same Ukrainian people that they have been living amongst for years and years. They're not being allowed out of the cities. They're not being allowed the same access to refugee areas. And this is not surprising, because the same thing is being faced by, according to news reports, by any people of color. There are reports that African students who were trying to get out of the Ukraine were told that they could not stand in the same line with Ukrainians. There are reports of Indian people trying to access bomb shelters and being told that they were not allowed because India was not helping the Ukraine militarily. And this is just white supremacy, and it's white supremacy in the Ukraine, but it also reflects the rest of Europe. It is at some of the border towns, the checkpoints, that other countries, Poland in particular, are refusing entry to people of color. You have to be a white Ukrainian if you want to be a refugee. And Melanie and I were talking about this yesterday, because there was a point towards the end of World War II when white supremacy was almost stamped out, where Nazism was almost stamped out in Europe. And it was the Russians who were kicking the Nazis' ass. And these are the same Russians that are vilified and have been vilified for decades. But it was the Russians who were kicking the Nazis' ass. And there was that point in history that they could have been exterminated for good. And what happened?
I mean, there's that, I'm trying to think about that Netflix documentary that came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago about this guy, Ivan the Terrible. I think he ran, sorry, trigger warning, but he ran one of the gas chambers. I think it was at Treblinka, and which is a death camp, a World War II death camp, German-run death camp. And he was being harbored in the United States and had lived here freely, obviously under a different name for 60 years, 50 or 60 years. And that, in fact, I forgot what the program was called, but there was a covert U.S. program to relocate Nazis, particularly like scientists, high-ranking Nazis who would be very useful if they were given safe haven in the United States, and to just absorb them into American society so that they could help, frankly, I think with the Cold War, like the larger project of crushing the Soviet Union, but also, just ensuring U.S. supremacy. Because the policy, U.S. quote-unquote foreign policy after World War II was, I forgot what the term is, but it was about basically U.S. world supremacy, essentially. Mm-hmm. I forgot the actual term for it. And so, so this Netflix documentary is like people, it's about the uncovering of this man's real identity. He's like very old by this point. He's like in his 80s or 90s or something. And like the refusal actually of the United States and possibly other countries, I'm sure other countries harbored Nazis, and provided safe passage and safe haven for Nazis, who otherwise were probably going to be hunted down, either by allies or by Russian forces that were literally hunting Nazis They were hunting Nazis to rid the world of the scourge of that particular an extreme type of hate. And the good old United States, you know, is like saying one thing out of one side of its mouth and out of the CIA, or, you know, is doing quite the opposite of that.
And I got to tell you, like, there's no gray area with Nazis. Like, there's not good Nazis and bad Nazis. There's, like, not a spectrum of Nazism. I mean, if you're a Nazi, you're a bad guy. And if you're a Nazi, you should be exterminated. And the idea that that the Russians were this close to exterminating the Nazis and were not allowed to just make that final push and destroy Nazism at its roots is horrific. And in shout out to Comrade Demetrius, it reminded me of The Lord of the Rings. And the One Ring, when Elrond was saying, "I was there when the courage of men failed. It should have ended that day, but evil was allowed to endure." So Nazism right now is like that one ring, and which just we haven't been able to destroy it. We haven't been able to get it to Mount Doom and throw it in the fires, and it's spread all over Turtle Island. It is all over Europe. It's all over the Ukraine. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be aid and support going to Ukrainian people who are suffering under occupation. And I think that is well and good. But there are also white supremacist Ukrainians who are going to live to spread that hate and that scourge, which, you know, should have been wiped out in World War II and wasn't. And we're seeing it now manifest in ways that are just horrific and disgusting. And that's what we're all having to deal with. And not just Native people, but Roma people in Europe, and Black people, and
Jewish folks,
and Just
thinking about like the synagogue murders in Pittsburgh, like Asian relatives, you know,
Yep.
Just like all of the mass shootings that happened just in the United States alone.
Yep. And Muslims in particular, you know, in New Zealand, where that sort of thing is unheard of.
The Christchurch shooting.
Yep. So this is what we have. We have this this white supremacy that is just, I think, no matter what we talk about today, it's going to come back to this idea of white supremacy and American exceptionality. And it's so disturbing. And it's disturbing, you know, when it shows up with some racist fucking bougie hotel owners in Rapid City. But it's just a disturbing thing.
And that's the same kind of white supremacy, frankly, as the kind of white supremacy that has been practiced and reproduced through the treatment of Romani peoples in many, many European nations. Spain, Portugal, a lot of Eastern European nations, the Ukraine, Hungary, the places that Elena mentioned. And I think before anyone like is freaking out and is accusing us of somehow saying that like Russia's invasion of the Ukraine is a positive thing, because of course Putin was like, we want to crush these neo-Nazis. Like he's actually spoken about that openly. Whether or not that's true, you know, he's like hearkening back to like, you know, previous like Russian invasions, like maybe attached to the revolution 100 years ago or so, right? Which was also about crushing Nazis, or these famous Russian or Soviet Nazi hunters, right? That Elena and I were talking about when we had the opportunity in the middle part of the 20th century to actually crush Nazis, and that like, you know, like actually like Soviet agents were incredibly like effective actually at hunting down and either killing or imprisoning Nazis to rid the world of the scourge of that type of white supremacy. I'm not saying that like somehow this justifies Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, you know, Putin's crazy. He's a crazy ass billionaire. Like he's nuts, you know? And the amount of people who are dying is obviously incredibly fucked up. You know, war is really fucked up. And the Red Nation has an anti-war position. Like, we're anti-war. We're like anti-all war. And so I think it's incredibly important for people not to like pigeonhole what we're saying as somehow like we're just parroting some sort of line that like is pro-Russia. Because I don't know. I feel like leftists always get accused of that by like other people in the United States, and that's simply not the case. What we're saying here is that there is like a serious, serious problem with white supremacy and with fascism that originated in fucking Europe. Thanks, Europe. You know? Thanks, Europe, for imperialism and like colonizing the entire world. So we have to put up with all of your disgusting ass like ideologies and the structures of racism that you exported to every other part of the world, and the incredible violence that you have perpetuated, the billions of people you've murdered, not to mention like other than human species, and all the land that you completely violated and destroyed in, you know, the larger projects of imperialism. But if we don't want Russia to use like the reason of crushing neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, you know, to invade that country in 2022, then what the fuck are we going to do to make sure that like neo-Nazis don't exist in the first place, so that that's not a thing, right? That we actually have to crush, or that we have to now, you know, like, or now, you know, having to contend with the fact that Russia's like, yes, like we want to combat the United States and be a superpower, but yes, we're also going to say that we want to crush neo-Nazis. Because you know what the truth is? Those neo-Nazis need to be fucking crushed. And those neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, they gained so much power because of U.S. backing. Can we just be honest about that? And it's the exact, in my mind, it's very similar to the U.S. providing like safe haven for hundreds of actual Nazis, you know, after World War II, and when tribunals were being held in Israel, and you know, and people were actually, Nazis were actually being held accountable for war crimes during the Holocaust. And so the U.S. is just always literally just roving around the world, you know, creating the possibilities for its continued supremacy and hegemony. And that's just U.S. imperialism. And this is why we say all the time in the Red Nation that the greatest enemy, you know, the greatest enemy of like actual peace in the world is U.S. imperialism. It's the United States. Like, you have to be able to like look at U.S. imperialism as a major like contributor and a cause for what's happening right now in the Ukraine. And that's not, first of all, that's having a pissing contest with Russia. That certainly has something to do with this like, you know, battling superpower bullshit that's constantly going on. But it has everything to do also with the United States, like being like, we support human rights, but then putting actual money and like ammunition in the hands of real neo-Nazis. And these neo-Nazis, you know, there was an Al Jazeera article that came out in 2018 that was reporting on the pogroms that were being committed by neo-Nazi groups. But also, I know this is probably going to be hard to hear, but there's like I think it was like the majority of Ukrainian people, particularly white Ukrainian citizens, had and have incredibly racist views on Romani people. I mean, the things that we were talking about that happen in places like Rapid City and border towns, Indian ruling, like just like groups of young white teenagers will cruise around border towns like Farmington or Rapid City, and they'll just like kill or maim or light on fire, you know, native people on the streets. This happens on a regular basis also in the Ukraine. It's still happening, and it was happening, you know, it got worse. Actually, this reporter in the Al Jazeera article said that it actually got worse after the United States helped to stage the coup, was this in 2015, to install the government that then made it more, you know, acceptable for neo-Nazis and kind of like white supremacist ideologies to kind of like arm themselves essentially and just patrol the streets. And so Indian killing in the Ukraine became more of a national pastime. And in a way, in the United States, like, Indian killing has become much more of a national pastime. Like, you can take Indian killing to the state capitol on January 6th and pretty much get away with it for the most part. Whereas people like Leonard Peltier, who's an actual indigenous revolutionary, you know, has been in prison now for 46 years for something he actually possibly didn't do at all. And we all know that there's evidence that he didn't do it. And yet, you know, like, I mean, I don't need to really point out double standards. I don't think that's very useful politically, or like hypocrisy, but I'm just trying to drive a point home about like, what are we going to do about global white supremacy? And like, what are we going to do about Nazis? Like actual Nazis? What are we going to do so that we don't have to see more war, and so that Romani people or Lakota people or Dene people don't have to keep just like being violated constantly because of these ideologies? Because I'm going to tell you right now, like the Fash over the last 5 years are not only incredibly empowered and emboldened, but they're out organizing those of us who have a different perspective, right, on how the world should be organized and how we should treat each other and what the future should look like. And so yes, outrage about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yes, support Ukrainian people. Like, yes, war is fucked up. But also, like, I really wish I had seen this much fucking outrage from people in the United States, you know, when, I don't know, any act of white supremacy was happening in any of these places. Like, I really wish you would funnel your energy and your money into that shit, or at least, like, get yourself politically educated enough about it. Because, goddammit, the longer war is against white supremacy. Can we just really be honest about that? And we're sucking at it. By we, I mean humanity. Especially people in the global north.
Because the United States is not. So if the United States government channeled as much energy into ending white supremacist and fascist militias in the United States as they are working on sanctions with Russia, against Russia, we would not have white supremacy and fascists in the United States roaming the streets freely. But it's more important to sanction Russia and I absolutely agree with what Melanie said. I am not for this invasion of Ukraine, and I do think Putin is insane. But I think we have to look at how we're viewing the invasion of Ukraine and the outrage, and why we don't have the same feeling about what is happening in Yemen or what is happening in Syria, and why Europe doesn't have the same open arm policy towards North Africans that they do towards Ukrainians, and why people aren't opening up their homes. And if we look at that, then we can see that there is a serious problem with white supremacy and a serious racist element in Europe. And it's not even hidden. It's been said on the news, outright, that Ukraine is relatively civilized, relatively European, read white.
And these are like U.S. diplomats. These are like government officials from the United States making fucking white supremacist comments.
Yep.
These are liberals too, BT dubs.
Yeah. So we need to look at that, and we need to really, expose that there is a major white supremacy problem, that there's a major racial component to what's going on in the Ukraine, and acknowledge and maybe talk a little bit about that, and talk about what we're going to do to eliminate Nazis, neo-Nazis, fascists from our streets before it. I don't know. I was watching on the news kind of with a bucket of popcorn when they attacked the U.S. Capitol, because I was like, damn, what's going on, man? This is really interesting. Like, there's dudes in horns and shit. And, we did a big podcast about that. But that's the kind of thing that's going to continue if we don't stop this fascism, neo-Nazism from, it's not just Europe. It's here. It's all here.
The U.S. has absolutely played a pivotal role in this resurgence of neo-Nazism and fascism that we're seeing, or that we have seen in the last like 5 or 6 years. Absolutely. CIA's played a role in it. It has everything to do with U.S. imperialism. And so I think for me, war is terrible. We are anti-war as the Red Nation. And yet at the same time, like the bigger picture, like understanding what we're really up against and what we really must be doing, you know, and how we must be organizing and framing our struggles. It just needs to be staunchly anti-imperialist, and it needs to be staunchly anti-fascist. It's like remarkable to me the way, even as wild things were unfolding on the ground in 2020, even just in Albuquerque with the George Floyd uprising, how quickly people, and by people I mean well-meaning people, I mean like liberals usually, were humanizing fascism, or like, you know, we're like apologizing, or like, oh, they just had bad upbringings, or, you know, just that kind of argument. And it's like, no, you need to take a stand. You need to like be anti-fascist. You need to be anti-Nazi, you know, and you need to be anti-imperialist. Like that's just, otherwise I don't, you know, like otherwise it's not going to get where it needs to be. And if we can't unite around those basic principles that like Nazis are bad, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because I'm profoundly uncomfortable and disappointed that we actually have to have some sort of debate, oh my God, about whether Nazis and fascists are bad. And it's like, wow, are you serious? Are you serious that this is something that isn't very clear to everyone, that this isn't something that unites the left or something like that? It's not good. The position we're in is not good because we can't actually unite around those things. And instead we squabble about, you know, our ideologies, and we fall for U.S. imperialist talking points. It's things aren't great, I would say, in the world of political organizing in the United States. So I don't know where to go from there. I don't know what to say, but white supremacy is the enemy. Nazis are definitely bad. And fascism needs to be crushed.
We need to go back to a primer. Nazis are bad. White supremacy is bad. And what part of this don't you understand? I mean, I did not have relatives who fought I don't come from a military family, so I didn't have relatives who fought in World War II. But I do know that friends of mine who did, the idea of Nazis being in power again is uniformly being described as a bad thing. So I don't know what part, like Melanie, I don't know what part of that people don't understand. I don't know what part of Nazi Germany and what happened in that period in history is unclear. I don't know about gas chambers and 6 million people dead. I don't know what part of that is unclear. And yes, it was, the majority of them were Jewish, but they also exterminated Romani and homosexual and non-binary people. I don't know what part of that is unclear. I don't know what part of Hitler basing his grand plan for Europe on how the United States government treated indigenous people. I don't know how that could be unclear. I don't know how, scorched earth policy, really created by Kit Carson and used by Adolf Hitler. I don't know what part of that is unclear. But I think basically everybody just needs to accept the mantra, Nazism is bad, white supremacy is bad. Put it on your hats. Don't put Make America Great Again. Put Nazis are bad. And then let's move forward into a more nuanced look at how we can fix this world. But once we all accept that Nazis are bad and
That's
and
like
white supremacy is bad, yeah,
that's like the basement level, I think,
Right.
where you need to be.
Right.
If we're gonna, like, as Elena says, fix this world, you just need to accept that Nazis are bad, or that, like, cops are like the foot soldiers of white supremacy, and like settler and imperial order, like the waffling, just like or just like U.S. imperialism is bad. Like, the U.S. is not a positive force in the world. You just need to accept those things. That's like basement level, I would say. And yet it is such a struggle. It is such a struggle to even get that across. So this is what I'm saying. I don't know. It leads to these things like Madeleine Albright passed away this week, right? And another news story. And so then it leads to famous liberal, right? Famous Democrat, during the Clinton administration. And it leads to these claims that, like, it's apparently a humanitarian, the war in Iraq was a humanitarian, deeply noble endeavor that the United States undertook. And that, what is it, that 500,000 children dying because of that it was definitely worth it. It was worth it to spread democracy throughout the world.
Yeah.
She said
and the
that.
fact that she said that, and that this is a woman who's now being touted as, one of the great female heads of the State Department. And she said that 500,000 Iraqi children dying was worth it. I don't see that. I don't see that anywhere in any way being acceptable, much less, worth it. To me, that just shows how the United States war machine works.
It's fucking warped. It is twisted. It is twisted if you think murdering 500,000 children is like the price we pay for democracy. Like, fuck you. You might as well just insert murdering 500,000 native people as the price you pay for the existence of the United States. Seriously, go fuck yourself. Like, if that's your logic. Or like Bill McKibben apparently went on Democracy Now! And was like, yes, I think it's a good idea to sanction Russia. Okay, cool. Let's just support, like, killing, because sanctions, U.S.-backed sanctions, kill. How many people do they kill per year in the places we sanction? It's like astronomical, the number of people who die because of U.S. sanctions every year throughout the world.
And who's not going to be hit by sanctions? Let's look at that.
Putin sure ain't.
Who is the... Yeah, because why? Because he's a billionaire.
He's got $1 billion of padding.
Yeah, he is not going to starve to death. But Russian women and children will. So is that going to be worth it too? Yeah.
She said, quote, this was from an interview with Leslie Stahl in May of 1996. Thanks for including this quote. On 60 Minutes, Elena. Madeleine Albright said, quote, I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. In response to Leslie Stahl being like, 500,000 children have died in Iraq because of the invasion. And so you have people who are supposed to be like the beacons of the movement and the left in the United States basically saying, I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. Probably better sanction, Russia. Probably better sanction Venezuela. They're the real evil in this world. And I don't, again, U.S. imperialism is bad. Sanctions are bad. War is bad. I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say. If you struggle with like knowing, like having a really strong moral, ethical, and political position on those things, I don't know what to do for you. I really don't. Especially if you should know better. If you're like somebody who's educated or like, I don't know, you're an academic or you're like a longtime organizer or whatever. Like somebody who knows the lingo, somebody who knows the trends, somebody who knows the history. There's no goddamn excuse. And yet I see a lot of it come from that class of people. Mm-hmm.
And yet, the one small beacon of light from the global south this week was, in my opinion, was from Belize. And William and Kate are cruising around the Caribbean, spreading the good news of the Queen's 75th, what is that, platinum anniversary or something like that?
I don't know anything about that shit.
Some weird ass. The old bird's been on the throne for a long time, and that's what we're celebrating, supposedly. And they were supposed to go to a coffee plantation in Belize, and the people in Belize were like, "You shall not pass." And so they had to reschedule their trip because, golly, there are some people in Belize and Jamaica and Barbados and the Bahamas who didn't think that British imperialism was a good thing.
Wow, really?
For their communities. And I was reading in the mainstream press that all of these two, Kate and William's tours of wherever they've gone, have always been referred to as triumphant. They're having a triumphant tour of all of the Commonwealth countries. And this one is a flat-out disaster because nobody wants them. And where they are allowed to show up, they're being told that they want apologies for slavery. They want apologies and reparations. And, of course, you're asking two of the wealthiest people on earth who have no intention of giving any money out of their pockets. So it would have to come through the actual British Parliament, and they're not allowing any money. So Kate and William are just
having a hard time.
Having a rough time.
Must be hard.
Because, that damn slavery.
Man, that damn colonialism. Just...
That damn colonialism and imperialism. Man. And damn it, it might have been their ancestors, but it could have been someone they're not related to, of course, because they don't pay attention to who they're related to, right? Not those people.
Because they marry each other. Oh. No self-respecting indigenous person would marry their own cousin.
And especially given the fact that they all come out looking like horses' rear ends. Like, at some point, you would say, we need to bring some new genes into this gene pool, but not the British. No. You look just like your great-grandfather, who's also your great-grandfather, because you had the same great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather is actually your uncle and your sister.
But that was, I don't know, them not being able to go to Belize kind of made my day. And then Jamaica basically standing up and saying, yeah, we don't think we're going to have the Queen as head of state for very much longer. We think we're going to, dispose of her. Yeah, she can, have her platinum, whatever it is, somewhere else, because we're just going to go in a different direction, like decolonization. Reject imperialization. Imperialism is bad. British imperialism, while not as bad as American imperialism, is certainly bad. Bad, bad, bad. And British imperialism, really? Just stop.
I mean, the Commonwealth, right, which still exists, is a manifestation and a holdover from formal British imperialism. Of course, decolonization did happen in many places in the global south. That's why it's called the global south now. And we were talking about what if the Commonwealth just was completely dismantled? What if it was just done away with before Queen Elizabeth kicks the can? That'd be kind of amazing to see that in our lifetime. It's just this disgusting vestige of just pure racism and colonial violence. If anyone's ever watched the Netflix show The Crown, it's about Queen Elizabeth, and it goes through the various periods of her life. And so there are some seasons of it where she does her first Commonwealth tour, because the Commonwealth tour is this like kind of like rite of passage for the royal family, or for like the people who are going to be kings and queens of England. And so it's like where they prove themselves like as leaders and stuff like that. I'm just like, shut up. I can't believe you guys are still doing this. Fuck off. It's like British imperialism is just like, oh my God, one of the most violent things that's ever happened to humanity, for damn sure. But the fact, I don't know, the fact that they're still celebrating it. And then it's just like Will and Kate, you know, just like going to Belize and getting turned away. It's just laughable. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, they're getting turned away from everywhere. Like Mary and Joseph, you know, they're like, nope, nope, didn't want you, nope. And they seem like surprised, like poor old William. I mean, I don't feel sorry for him at all, but, you know, poor guy can't even string a series of words together that are appropriate for the occasion. Like, he's so passive. Slavery is bad, right? Slavery was horrible. Slavery was evil. And your ancestors did it. Like, take ownership of that. Acknowledge that. You know, apologize. But he can't do it.
That's not part of the PR script for the royal family, apparently. I don't know. I don't even care. Like, fucking institution. You guys need to all just like rot in hell. Like, no one gives a shit. Like, you're just you're just fodder for tabloids at this point.
Yep.
Just dismantle that institution, to redistribute the wealth, and let's move on with life. Like,
exactly. Give all the money to education and in previously Commonwealth areas.
oh my God. I can't believe that was even a news story. That's funny.
Oh, because poor things. Their private jet was turned away.
Isn't Canada part of the Commonwealth?
Yes. I'm sure that Justin Trudeau would have welcomed them with open arms, but give them something to talk about besides, never mind. Well, I don't even want to go into Canada. No.
Oh my God. Well, so this is related? I mean, this isn't really related. But I wanted to talk, kind of the last thing to talk about, and I wanted to spend a fair amount of time, even though we're, I don't know. I feel like maybe that we should do an entire episode on this, just because there's a lot to, I think, go through with the Leonard Peltier clemency push. I think what I will say on this episode is that, you know, maybe folks have noticed, and if you haven't noticed, I would encourage you to just Google Leonard Peltier, because there's a lot of mobilization right now around his clemency case. You know, those of us who were organizing for this 6 years ago at the end of Obama's term, there was such hope. And apparently there was also hope at the end of Clinton's term, 16 years prior to that, or 15 years prior to that, that both Clinton and Obama would have granted him clemency. There are some revelations that have come out more recently. I would say starting back in July of 2021 was when kind of this newest kind of surge in mobilization around his release from prison started, because one of the prosecutors, a guy named James Reynolds, I think that's his name actually, he helped to prosecute Peltier back in 1977 and put him in prison. He wrote a letter and he was like, we lied. We lied to get him into prison. And we withheld evidence that actually would have proven his innocence, you know, and the fact that 2 FBI agents, because he was accused, right, of murdering 2 FBI agents in Pine Ridge. And he's like, you know, someone had to pay for the murder of those 2 FBI agents. And then we just decided to pin it on Peltier. And this is the prosecutor. It's a former U.S. attorney making this statement in this letter that came out, I believe it was on July 9th of 2021. And I think once that letter came out, it seemed like there was more interest, I think, in really pushing Biden to grant clemency to Peltier. It's not a pardon, because Peltier doesn't want a pardon, because he's like, a pardon would mean that you're pardoning me. I'm admitting that I'm guilty of this crime. And for the last 46 years, Peltier has like maintained that he did not commit these murders of these two FBI agents. And so he's like, I don't want to pardon. He's like, what is it called when they confer? Give me a second. It's not confer. Like a sentence. It starts with a C. Commute. People are advocating for his sentence to be commuted. And he actually qualifies. This is another thing I think that's incredibly important for people to understand. Peltier currently qualifies for a commutation of his sentence for health reasons. Right? He contracted COVID-19 last month, or I believe it was maybe in January. He's elderly. He's in a facility that has, I believe it's called level 3 COVID protocol. And so basically everyone is just isolated constantly from each other because of the COVID protocol. And he wrote a letter in January of 2022. And he wrote, COVID has turned Coleman Prison back to the dark ages. I remember a time at Marion when I was put in solitary for so long when 72 hours could make you start to forget who you were. I once wrote down who I was on the concrete floor under my bed, so if I forgot, I could read it back to myself. I traded my last cigarette for a pencil. I'd rushed to the door when a guard left the meager plate of food just to see a glimpse of another human being. Even if it was the one that hated me, it was another human being and good for my mind for a minute. And he writes, I'm in hell, and there's no way to deal with it but to take it as long as you can. I cling to the belief that people are out there doing what they can to change our circumstances in here. The fear and stress are taking a toll on everyone, including the staff. You can see it in their faces and hear it in their voices. The whole institution is on total lockdown. And so he because of the conditions of COVID in the prison, he says they are turning an already harsh environment into an asylum. And for many who did not receive a death penalty, we are now staring down the face of one. And so that was just under the conditions of the lockdown. And then he got COVID. And he's elderly. He has, his diabetes. He has a heart issue, a heart disease. His health is already ailing. And actually the criteria for having your sentence commuted, ailing health, having served enough time, having served a lot of time already in prison, those are 2 criteria for getting your sentence commuted. And the only person who can do that is President Biden. And so there's been incredible mobilization. Ruth Buffalo, who is a Democrat in the House of Representatives in the state of North Dakota. She spearheaded an October 26th letter from, I believe it's called like the Native American Caucus of like Native state legislators or something like that, or the council. 20, including some like Benny Shendo, some Native legislators from the state of New Mexico. They signed on to this letter urging Biden to commute Peltier's sentence for these reasons. A number of congressional members under the leadership of a Democratic representative from the 3rd District of Arizona, Raul Grijalva. I forgot the number. Maybe it was somewhere between like 10 to 20. Congressional members also wrote a letter on October 8th of 2021 urging President Biden to commute Peltier's sentence for these reasons. And so this kind of all started because like this James Reynolds, the cop, prosecutors are cops. The cop who helped to prosecute Peltier was just like, yeah, his sentence should be commuted. Like, and he should get a retrial because like today in the climate apparently around like the ethics of evidence in trials, apparently the way that like the evidence that Peltier was convicted on would not hold any water apparently in a court today. And Peltier just issued a statement this week, I think like 2 days ago, where he wants a trial. He wants a new trial. And so the tactics, I mean, he went through several appeals. All of the appeals have been denied over the years. So it's either at this point his sentence just gets commuted by Biden, or he gets another trial, right? And apparently, according to the law and just basic like constitutional rights, he has a right to a trial, because the evidence is irrefutable that what he was convicted on was not only there was gross misconduct by the prosecution, there was intimidation of witnesses, there was withholding of key evidence, evidence that would probably have meant that he would not have been charged of those crimes. And the fact that his co-defendants were found not guilty by means of self-defense, and yet he somehow was not allowed to have that argument, that he was acting in self-defense. Apparently there's some ballistics evidence that shows irrefutably that the gun that he had that day did not match the bullets that were actually found to have killed those agents. And so there is like actual real evidence that has been revealed that proves his innocence. I mean, quite frankly. But he's not allowed to get a trial, and there's no political will from these Democrats. You know, I mean, Trump almost did. I guess there was like a last hour attempt by Peltier's current pro bono lawyer, Kevin Sharp, and like Kim Kardashian, if you guys remember this. Anyway, to get Peltier, his sentence commuted by Trump. And really the reason why, you know, Peltier has been in prison for this long and his sentence hasn't been commuted by, what is it now? It's Clinton, Obama, and Trump, is because of the FBI. The FBI issued a statement yesterday, still maintaining, just like using hyperbole, maintaining like this, like, what is it? The Blue Lives Matter kind of bullshit. Saying that, like, you know, the lives of these FBI agents were like brutally taken by Leonard Peltier, like he's an animal, you know, like he's this terrible person who deserves to die in jail. I mean, I'm just like obviously kind of paraphrasing and ad-libbing off of it, but the FBI continues to maintain this kind of like Blue Lives Matter line about it, even though the actual facts of the case, it's very clear that Peltier should have been a mistrial, and that there's actual evidence demonstrating that he did not commit this crime. And so the only explanation, right, is that he was vilified and he was put in prison, you know, in a symbolic gesture to Native revolutionaries everywhere, right? Yeah. Just being like, well, if you stand up against the United States, this is what's going to happen to you, right? And
one of the most heartbreaking things to me over all these years is, well, at least the last 20 years, is that if he simply admitted that he had done it, or if he lied and said that he had done it, he would have been eligible for parole, and he probably would have been paroled. But he's not going to admit to something he didn't do.
Yeah.
And that's just fucked up. I mean, it's fucked up that if he was to lie, they'd let him out. But because he has ethics, they won't let him out.
Yeah. Because he's like, no, I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. What, like a strong person to do that, even though he has suffered for 46 years. He's the longest standing political prisoner in U.S. history. So I think it's important to point that out, that it's an indigenous revolutionary who's the longest standing political prisoner in U.S. history. Not a coincidence, given what we know about the incredible threat that indigenous liberation poses to U.S. settler order and just the existence of the United States, period. And he was also, I think, other facts from the case, he was also basically charged, like all of the documents from the prosecution have been reviewed, right? Have been reviewed over the years. And he was essentially convicted because he was present at the scene of a crime. And there was actually no evidence that he committed the crime. And then his co-defendants were let off on the argument of self-defense. And this Reynolds guy, one of his prosecutors, wrote, he said that, quote, he keeps thinking about how Peltier was charged with murder for being present during a violent scene where people were killed. The same circumstances for hundreds of Trump supporters during the Capitol attack on January 6th, except they all just went home afterward. And if you were to use the same logic for all of those people, they would all be charged with murder? They would all be charged with murder.
Yeah, because cops died.
Because cops died that day. FBI agents are cops. Because cops died that day, right? But, of course, those individuals are not going to be charged with murder, right? And there's been this, like, the whole fiasco in this, like, weird theater in U.S. media and the Congress about trying to get Trump impeached or whatever that was. Like, I actually didn't pay a lot of attention to that kind of stuff surrounding the inquiry into January 6th. And yet, so there's just so much, there's so much lying, and there's just so much, like, willful concealing and threat that has gone into keeping Peltier in prison. And I guess in a way, this is very expected that cops would act this way, or that the United States would act this way, given how much they hated the American Indian movement. I understand, like, AIM was a very organized revolutionary force that really took Indigenous liberation seriously in that particular moment in history, and really posed like a real challenge to U.S. supremacy, and continues to, I think, in the hearts of those of us who very much appreciate and respect what AIM represented. I guess what really, and so in that sense, I understand why Biden would be scared. I understand why, you know, the FBI would refuse to let go of this narrative around Peltier all these years. Like, if you understand how cop logic works, then this is just basically cop logic on a really big scale, essentially. And why the FBI is holding this up, and why Biden would probably be a little bit scared, even though he's been issuing apologies and he got Deb Haaland into the Secretary of Interior position, and he's been doing all of these, like, he's been throwing money at Native people. He's like, yes, Native people are wonderful. I love Indians, except for when you're a revolutionary. You know, he's like, well, when you're combating the United States, I don't know. You might still need to be punished. I might need to send a clear message that you're a bad Indian. Talking about the good Indians and bad Indians. He's like rewards good Indians, but he, you know, Leonard Peltier just represents the bad Indians, you know, of the world, the red nations and the aims. So it makes sense to me why the state is still acting this way. I think what disturbs me is when I see activists acting this way, or other Native people. And there has been, I think it's partly because the American Indian movement has been really discredited, I think, over the last 15 to 20 years. I think the misogyny, right? And just like the way that Indigenous feminism, I think, in the 21st century has really transformed the landscape and the values of Indigenous movements, specifically in the United States, the critique of male leadership, the critique of misogyny, those things make a lot of sense. And I think they're incredibly important, you know, to strengthen our movements. What I think is a little bit concerning to me is when Indigenous feminism is used to, like, vilify and to discredit other Indigenous revolutionaries, to make claims that somehow, like, if AIM was too misogynist, then we just need to discount it as any type of revolutionary formation that existed or had any impact. And that's not true. That's historically not true. But then that also, like, erases and invisibilizes, like, the Native women who led AIM. I'm thinking like Madonna Thunderhawk. I'm thinking Women of All Red Nations. I'm thinking about the legacy of survival schools. And the women, just like the women who saw AIM as like a tool of liberation and like fully supported AIM and worked with AIM, and made that choice. And so, you know, I'm saying this because, you know, the case of Anna Mae Aquash and her assassination has been so strongly tied to Peltier's clemency case, to the point where I still see people saying, like, he needs to stay in prison because he murdered her, because he murdered Anna Mae Aquash. And, you know, in this current era where Indigenous feminism, I think, again, has really become a much more prominent feature of Indigenous liberation struggles, you know, you have people who are advocates for ending MMIWG, right? Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. She is an MMIWG. She absolutely is. As are all of the other women of AIM who were murdered, actually, because of their revolutionary struggle, just like her. You know, during that time, there's like 60 or 70 AIM members who were assassinated. Many whose names we don't know, but we know Anna Mae's name, and that's important, and she deserves justice. But so do all of those other people who were murdered because of their commitment to Indigenous revolution. And so does Peltier deserve justice for the egregious injustice that has been committed against him. And it's important, I think, also just fact-based issues. Like, let's take the Indigenous feminist lens out of this right now and just look at the facts, that there's also overwhelming, irrefutable evidence that Peltier was not involved in her murder. I mean, it's documented, actually. And so we need to be able to see, like, the suffering that Peltier has endured at the hands of the U.S. settler state as separate. It's related to the suffering that Anime Aquash endured and that all of those AIM members endure and that Indigenous water protectors and revolutionaries continue to endure. It's related, right? Because we're all standing up against our occupier and our oppressor, and they're going to do anything that they need to do to suppress the revolutionary struggle that we carry in our hearts and our spirits, right? Because it's incredibly threatening to them, especially Indigenous people, because we were here first. You know, we have a moral claim to authority and to the land here. So in that sense, they're all connected. But justice for Anime is not connected to justice for Peltier. They're just not. And they need to be understood as separate cases that have separate facts attached to them. And that if you're advocating for the clemency of Peltier as somebody who really believes, who's like an Indigenous feminist, right? As somebody who believes in how we need to abolish MMIWG, that it's not a contradiction, and that you're not somehow like selling out like justice for Native women who've been violated by AIM members or by white men or, you know, any Native woman who's experienced violence. You're not selling out that movement by trying to get Leonard free from prison. I promise you, you're not doing it. The facts fully support the fact that he was framed and criminalized and that he has been imprisoned symbolically to make all of the rest of us afraid to rise up against our occupier and our oppressor. And there's like a ton of information you can find online about this that just states the facts very clearly about how those cases are not related, and that all of our relatives, Aquash, Peltier, all of our murdered revolutionaries from AIM, they all deserve justice. They absolutely deserve justice, and we should keep fighting for that justice. But advocating for Peltier's release and the commutation of his sentence, it doesn't mean that you're being a bad feminist. I just want to say that as like an Indigenous feminist who really believes in these things. I thought that for a long time, and it made me a little bit reluctant to be like really like out there and vocal about Peltier's clemency. But once I actually read the facts and I really understood what was going on, I was like, oh, actually, Peltier is a revolutionary and he's an elder. You know, he's an elder who is suffering. And like, isn't there also a value in Indigenous communities to take care of our elders? Isn't there a value to do that? And he's an elder who's like alone. He's underfed. He is sick. And he's in the clutches of the U.S. colonial state in prison. And doesn't he deserve to like come home for these last years of his life and be cared for like all of our elders deserve to be cared for? I think he does. And to use or to weaponize feminism to say otherwise seems incredibly misguided and heartless to me. I just felt like it was important to say that. You look like you want to say something, Elena.
I mean, I can't believe that in 2022 we're still equating or we're still tying Peltier with Anime Aquash, because this was, you know, that's an old story. That's an old excuse. And first, let me say, I absolutely agree. Like, you know, Peltier has served over and again more than any other human being for committing this crime. Like, he has been in prison for longer than anyone else, and who committed, you know, who would have been sent to prison. Like, nobody who committed 2 murders would be serving today 46 years. Like, it just wouldn't happen. And so his sentence is not only, or the amount of time that he's been in prison is not only grossly unfair and grossly prejudicial. The fact that the evidence does not support the crime, and this was known 35 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, those ballistic reports on the bullets, like, that was known so many years ago. The fact that the FBI coerced people with mental challenges into testifying against Peltier, and then when they realized what they'd done, they came out in public and said they didn't know what they were saying and that they were forced to make these statements. And I mean, all of that is in the books. I mean, that's all old history. And everyone, that I ever talked to who was in AIM, and women, and really super badass women too. Like the women that I knew who were in AIM, even the ones who were at Wounded Knee, were so badass, like I'm scared of them. And they all said to me that the FBI killed Anime Akwash, and that was fairly well accepted within the community at the time. It was the FBI or the FBI paid people to do it. And the fact that her hands were cut off so that she could not be identified readily. I mean, there's a lot, like if you want to really do a deep dive into the murder of Anime Akwash, it's brutal, it's horrific. And it was definitely not Leonard Peltier, beside the fact that it was proven that he was hundreds of miles away. He deserved, I mean, my heart hurts for him. And all I want for him is to be able to see the blue sky and to feel the sun on his face and to see the land. And I think that this goddamn fucking country owes him that. And, I've heard also that any president that commutes his sentence will have the FBI, against them for the rest of their lives or whatever. Like, who cares? I mean, why didn't Obama do it? He was done. He wasn't going to be a freaking president anymore. He'd served his 8 years. Trump, he's freaking insane. So whatever was going through his mind, whatever. But come on, Biden, like, let him out. This is torture. I mean, it's torture for him. It's torture for everybody who's fought so hard for the last 45 years to get him out. It's time.
And like, I haven't worked super closely with his International Defense Committee. They are based in Albuquerque, and so there was collaboration for many years. There has been between the Red Nation and the Peltier International Defense Committee. So we started to do work on this early on when the Red Nation was founded, because we actually shared an office, for a long time. And I think it's important. I've spoken to a lot of people from that era of AIM and his contemporaries. I've had relationships, intergenerational relationships with AIM members and other people from that time. I'm a historian also of, the Indigenous Liberation Movement, particularly the one that's based in the United States. And it's not overstating this to say that the destiny and like the future of Indigenous liberation is also tied up with Leonard. Like, Leonard has very strong medicine, okay? And those of us who do this work, who have a strong basis in who we are as Indigenous people, carry really powerful medicine when we're doing this work. And when Leonard is free, when like Che Leonard is free, you're going to feel it. Trust me. It will reverberate throughout the movement, because there's almost like a piece of all of us locked up with him. I'm being really honest here, because he really does represent like the way in which the United States has continued, throughout history to crush Indigenous liberation. And that's the prayer that he carries. It's the prayer that we all carry when we do this work. And when Leonard's free, we're all going to be free. Okay? And it's gonna change. Something's gonna happen. There's gonna be a shift in the movement. This may sound too yoded and ridiculous for me to say, but I really think that this is the truth. And I have heard people say this about him. I've heard spiritual leaders who work with Leonard and who have over the decades say this, like, it's not a joke, And so I think just for the sake of the movement and for the sake of the future of our people and our ability to continue to rise up, our destiny is wrapped up in Leonard Peltier's destiny, actually. And however he becomes free, I hope he becomes free and gets to be embraced again by our people, by his own ancestors, by his community, you know, before he passes on into becoming an ancestor. Like, that's the goal, for him to be treated with dignity, you know, before that time comes. But it really is, you know, it's something that is incredibly central to the struggle for Indigenous liberation. It's very central to the spirit of that struggle, that he be freed from prison. And so this is just like, you know, my plea, I guess, and just trying to impart the importance of Peltier's clemency case to Indigenous people, especially who are listening to this, like why it is so, it's in our hearts. We literally carry him in our hearts, you know, in a place where he can't do that for us. That's not true. He's been doing it for us for 46 years, but where he's isolated, I think, from the feeling of that embrace, being blanketed in prayers, I think that the rest of us get to experience here in our homelands. And so I just wanted to bring that up, especially because there is so much movement right now. NBC News came out with a story yesterday, a very good story covering this. I have never seen mainstream media talk about Leonard Peltier. It's a big deal. What's happening right now around Peltier's case is a really big deal. If you're interested in reading more, HuffPost has been doing excellent coverage since November on the issue. They've been writing about a piece a month on the issue. Just look it up. You'll be able to find all of the facts. Excellent breakdown in a November article in HuffPost about the Peltier case. And there are even more politicians, very prominent figures in Senate, the Indian Affairs Committee, the former Justice Committee of Congress have come forward in support of Peltier's clemency. So I really think that right now there's a feeling that he will be freed because of these efforts. And it's a time to pay attention. It's a time to lay down prayers. And it's a time to say that this is something that's very important for us to accomplish in the struggle for Indigenous liberation. Which is why I wanted to bring it up. It is perhaps, in my mind, maybe more important news than any of the other things we've covered, to be honest with you, as an Indigenous person who belongs to these traditions.
It is, and I just think the exhale of all of us in Indian country once he's free will just be so profound. Yeah. I can't say any more than that. It's just, I agree. Absolutely. Everything you said.
Well, I just want to, I don't know, like the Red Nation knows Peltier and all of these other freedom fighters who have come before us so much. And I don't know, I just want to dedicate this episode. That's like a small, stupid thing to do. But it's like, in some ways, I think these words are prayers, laying down a prayer here for Peltier, you know, and he probably won't be able to listen to this, but just know that we know that there are a lot of us who understand and who know, and who, come rain or shine, come whatever, whatever may come, will continue to hold this prayer and keep this story alive, that you have also held. You're not carrying it alone. You're not carrying it alone, Grandpa Leonard. Just know that. And I've heard many people say, like, you will be free. And I believe that. Those people have a vision and they've seen things, and I trust that vision. So I just kind of wanted to wrap up our episode with that. We've gone over time a bit, but thank you so much again for joining us here on Red Power Hour. Again, if you're interested in becoming a patron, you can go to patreon.com, Red Media PR. You can start out at $1 a month. It goes all the way up to $100 a month, but whatever you can contribute, really appreciate it. Thanks so much.